We have our yeah, 5 people already joined.
Sit up straight. Then I see myself on the video and I.
Yeah, I do. Like exactly with these,
Yeah.
all this video stuff and that when it zooms in on you and you put the speaker on, you suddenly realize, oh well.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. Do you hear it?
Morning.
Okay.
1, 2. Good morning. Take this off, right? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Moana Blue Pacific Pavilion. I don't need to say why we have a pavilion, because Pacific is threatened by sea level rise. So it's a very good idea to give some height to protect what is the home of the Pacific from sea level rise. I made that up. That was not in my talking points, but how wonderful to see you all this morning. State Secretary, Minister Mori, and ambassadors, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We are here for a special moment. For those of you who have seen that, is to launch the regional, not launch the Regional Pacific NDC Hub, but its Strategy 2030 on the occasion of COP26. To give you a little bit of background, Pacific leaders a few years back had called for a regional, nationally determined contributions hub to provide advice, support, technical services to Pacific countries in their preparations, updating, tracking, monitoring of nationally determined contributions, as well as drawing trends across the whole of the region and pulling the threads of how the Pacific was implementing and making progress on their NDC. So it's a very important part of the architecture, the technical architecture of Pacific's climate strategy and Pacific's climate actions. And as part of that, the NDC had been called to develop by the Pacific's leaders its strategy for 2030, in the decade of acceleration, in the decade of firming up the Pacific's climate actions, and to ramp up its accelerate its implementation. And the strategy itself had been launched already earlier in this year by Fiji's Prime Minister, who will be who's on his way, I understand, and who will be with us in the audience in a few minutes. And but this was a moment where we could share our Strategy 2030 with our key development partners who have provided considerable support and very generous support to this effort, as well as technical advice and assistance in shaping the NDC work across the Pacific. So with these introductory remarks, again, welcome to the pavilion, and I have great pleasure in inviting to talk to us Dr. Maria Fleshbert, Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany, to give some introductory remarks. And Madam State Secretary, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, for this very kind and nice introduction. Minister Mori, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you very much for having me this morning for this important event. I have to say, I feel a little bit humbled to speak before Minister Mori. I was told that you want this, and so I will do as I am expected to do. So I want to repeat the obvious, that climate change is a race against time, and that we cannot afford letting 1.5 degrees slip out of reach. That is really obvious. So let me just share that even Germany, with a major flooding in the west of our country, we recently got a small taste of what extreme events Pacific Islands nations already have to deal with on a regular basis. A report by the OECD on losses and damages from the climate change, which was launched this Monday in the German pavilion, make it painful clear that risks and impacts are addressing all of us, but vulnerable island nations in particular, they are facing and will increasingly face. At the same time, Pacific countries are among the leaders in climate action. So we owe you and further vulnerable nations the 1.5-degree target on the Paris Agreement, the IPCC has later shown in its special report how important this target, instead of merely well below 2 degrees, is. Despite contributing only a negligible amount to global emissions, you also are among the most ambitious in mitigation action. This strong climate leadership was illustrated by a call of the Pacific ministers in 2017 for a mechanism to support the Pacific region nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, which are at the heart of the Paris Agreement. The same year, you, Minister, as COP23 President, officially launched the Regional Pacific NDC Hub during the 23rd session of the Conference of Paris in Bonn, in our country, in Germany, where you taught us the spirit of Talanoa progress. Germany is proud to be one of the early supporters of the NDC Hub, joined by Australia and New Zealand. And I also acknowledge the support from the United Kingdom for the initial phase of the NDC Hub. And the Hub delivers. I was told that the NDC Hub currently supports 37 activities as requested by 14 Pacific Island countries to review, develop, and enhance their NDCs. The Hub also launched a Strategy 2030 in April this year, a long-term vision for supporting a low carbon and climate resilient Pacific, linking the global climate agenda with the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. For us, the Pacific Hub is a prime example of multilateral cooperation, the leading regional approach within the global NDC partnership, which embodies the opportunities of trusted collaboration among true partners. So, Excellencies, your country's contributions to climate change might be neglectable, but by setting example of how climate change can be tackled, the impact of your example reaches far beyond its direct effect. Although I won't be a member of the next German government, I'm sure that the Hub will continue to be a high importance to Germany in supporting a climate neutral and climate resilient Pacific. So we hope that many more partners will join in supporting the NDC Hub works for supporting your climate leadership. So thank you very much for your engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, State Secretary. And we know that Germany and Pacific Partnership will be an enduring and a far-reaching partnership. And thank you for all the support you have personally provided and for the government in working with the Pacific and raising the Pacific's voice in the international forums. Greatly appreciated. With that, colleagues, if I can now call on Australia's Ambassador for the Environment, Mr. Jamie Isbister, to deliver a few remarks. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I firstly want to just thank and acknowledge the collaboration between SPREP, Pacific partners, with GIZ, with New Zealand on this critical initiative and program. I also want to just acknowledge how fantastic it is to have Pacific representatives and leaders here at COP26. We know it's been a really challenging time for people to be able to travel with the COVID issues, with logistics, and it's been so great to have the participation by different Pacific countries and communities to be here. Also acknowledge that quite a few leaders unfortunately couldn't get here. That also has been a challenge, and I think one of the things that from Australia's side we've been very keen to try and ensure that the Pacific voice is able to be as strong and clear at this COP26. So this, I think, is one of the initiatives and platforms that gives that strong sort of voice. I also really want to highlight just how critical, this Pacific NDC Regional Hub is. Frankly, I think it's, from the way we look at it, is it's a two-way street. It's obviously the role it has in working with Pacific countries to build awareness, understanding, and strengthening ambition in NDCs, to look at how countries can be working through the commitments, the actions that they are taking in response to the climate elements and issues. But it's also a real reflection back and challenge, I'll speak for Australia, to look at the leadership role that Pacific countries play. Fiji, Papua New Guinea, RMI, others who are, through their own initiatives, but also through this Pacific Regional Hub, are outlining what ambition on climate looks like, on mitigation, on adaptation, on climate financing. And this is something which, has really been something that Australia's considered and been challenged by, and to look, how do we also bring that level of ambition? Through the Pacific Island Forum, there's been a lot of discussion about how do we continue collectively as a Pacific community to lift ambition. As you probably heard, Prime Minister Morrison announced a couple of weeks ago that Australia would commit to a 2050 net zero target, that Australia will now focus on how we align our efforts to get to emissions to net zero by 2050, and also what that's going to mean as we continue to build ambition, greater investment, greater focus to transition and deliver action over the next decade. And so the long-term strategy, the updated NDC, reflects that important step, and how, in partnerships with Pacific countries, we continue to work and look at how we collectively deliver stronger outcomes. Also, we launched our adaptation communication. What Australia is doing, as the German State Secretary said, that we're all now facing the challenges of climate change. Australia's had the challenges of droughts, of floods, of bushfires, and the adaptation communication looks at what are we going to have to do to use the science, the investments in adaptation to deal with those crises that we know are going to increasingly be coming at us. And then finally, on climate financing, how do we support or work with each other to deliver better outcomes? The government, the Prime Minister announced yesterday that we would double our climate financing to $2 billion. And a lot of that is on adaptation. And we know it's a priority for Pacific countries. But our experience on this is we need to also learn what's working, what's not. And actually the partnership with Pacific countries in investing in adaptation, on mitigation, is how we together improve not just the resources and investments, but how we're going to deliver better outcomes together. So I just want to thank, again, the Pacific Regional Hub. I want to thank Pacific partners for not only the work that's being done through the NDC efforts, but also the leadership it shows to the region, to Australia, and also to the globe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Jamie, for those kind remarks, and also your ongoing solidarity and support to what some of us have called the microprocessor of climate action, the NDC Hub for the Pacific. And with that, if I can call Ambassador Kay Harrison of New Zealand, New Zealand's Ambassador for Climate Change, to offer a few remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nisambula Vanaka, Talofa Lava. Warm Pacific greetings and good morning to you all. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting New Zealand to be part of this Pacific event. And it's great to see that the Pacific is represented at COP26 in Glasgow, in spite of the fact that it's halfway around the world, it's cold, and it's COVID. Aotearoa New Zealand is committed to tackling climate change alongside our Pacific partners. And our support to the Pacific Regional NDC Hub is part of this. Climate change we all know, is an existential crisis for our communities in the Pacific who wish to defend their homes and their livelihoods against the impacts of climate change. Fiji's 3 major cyclones in 2020 to 2021 are just one example of the multiple threats that face Pacific countries. Climate change targets or nationally determined contributions are at the heart of turning this picture around. NDCs are how countries make the Paris Agreement and its objective of keeping the temperature limited to 1.5 degrees a reality. But they have 2 purposes. And one of those purposes is to transition your economy to a low emissions, resilient future. And the other is to cooperate so that we do it together enough. NDCs, where NDCs are delivered using an inclusive approach, they can also address issues of social inequality and our other SDG objectives. The work that the Regional Pacific NDC Hub is doing to support Pacific Island countries with their NDCs and drive sustainable, resilient development is so important. As others have said, our Pacific Island partners have a key role in influencing us. That influence was evident in Paris with 1.5 degrees. It's been evident in the enhancement of NDCs, including New Zealand's to now -50 by 2030. It's evident in the influence on improving the delivery by donors towards the $100 billion goal. The Pacific's voice is louder than the size of its population, but it's probably about the size of the Pacific. It's a very important voice that needs to be amplified on this side of the planet. It's great to see us share the work of the Strategy 2030 today, which encapsulates the aspirations of the region for a sustainable, low carbon and climate resilient Pacific. And I would like to congratulate all of those who worked on it. Any of us in government know how hard it is to put a strategy together, not just the beautiful presentation of it, but of course, the deep thinking underneath it, the collaboration, and the fact that once again, the Pacific is working together in partnership with one another. Kotahitanga, working together. We look forward to continuing to partner with the Pacific NDC Hub and the deepened engagement and collaboration that this strategy will help guide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison, and thank you for your continued partnership with the NDC Hub. And with that, if I can call on, first of all, apologies from Fiji's Prime Minister. He was on his way and then he had to be called to his next event. But as you are aware, we have 3 Pacific leaders and they're being really pulled in too many directions at the same time. We've never had such a thin presence of leaders at a COP. It gives me great pleasure in introducing and welcoming Minister Vera Mori, Papua New Guinea's Minister for Environment, Conservation and Climate Change, and the region's superpower. Minister, if I can call on you to offer a few remarks and a thanks and appreciation to our development partners as well as our partners. You can just, yes.
Okay. Will I be
Oh, yeah.
Minister?
Microphone.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Also, I'd like to acknowledge my brother, colleague minister from Australia, and all your very distinguished guests up in the front. I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of Papua New Guinea to thank Dr. Ben Marcos Lees and the government for us to basically progress and conclude our respective national determined contributions. From Papua New Guinea's point of view, national determined contributions are so important as it provides the guidelines for us to collectively, as a member of the global community, address the impact and fight against the biggest challenge we have, which is climate change. We must all know that climate change is a faceless monster. It is more a juggernaut, and it has got no boundary. Unfortunately, for those of us countries of the Pacific are made up to pay for issues and problems that we are not part of creating them. I'd like to thank for this opportunity to be given to express our gratitude.
We don't see them. Okay.
I'd like to basically put it this way. In the Pacific, we may be seen as small island nations. It may only be a dot on the global map. But what they don't realize is that the Pacific Island nations and its territorial waters cover 20 to 25% of Mother Earth. It is our oceans that we often depend on are now facing the brunt of climate change. The temperatures are rising, but in the top 20 meters of our Pacific waters, temperatures are already 4 degrees centigrade. How do we compensate for small island nations, which covers millions of square kilometers of sea area? This is a challenge because of the increase in the temperatures, we have tuna migrating. We have other fish stock migrating. So this is the point that we need to make and establish. Under our respective national determined contributions, we must now more focus on adaptation and mitigation. We must see how we can provide the different sources of livelihoods sustainability for those small Pacific Island nations, including Papua New Guinea, because that's where our economy depends on. And this is very important. As a country, Papua New Guinea's contributions to national determined contributions, we have also made concerted efforts with the assistance of GIZ to complement all policies to ensure that we walk the path of our respective NDC. What I want to point out here is that back in PNG, we realized that we host 30% of global tropical rainforest nations. Our government have made a decision to ban round logging by 2025. And by 2030, we are going to ban total logging. But at the same time, we are undertaking active other programs like tree planting and etc. So what I'm trying to say is this: the challenges faced by our small island nations of the Pacific are real, and that we must now actually have to walk that talk so that those people on those island nations may have an opportunity to go back to a nation that can exist with other countries of the world, including Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for those words of appreciation. And always when I get an opportunity to speak about Papua New Guinea, we need to be reminded that Papua New Guinea is the home for 18% of the world's biodiversity alone, 30% of the world's tropical natural forest, and it spawns 40% of the world's tuna. And it in one country alone, that much of the global resources rest. So with this, if I can now call on Mr. Espen Ronberg, who's the recently appointed Director of Climate Change and Environmental Sustainability in the South Pacific Commission. The South Pacific Commission is the institutional hub of the NDC and does fantastic technical and scientific coordination work for whole of the region. Espen, over to you.
Your Excellencies, Ministers, Ambassadors, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the Pacific community. I was actually in Suva those days when Prime Minister Bainimarama suggested this idea of a regional Pacific NDC hub to his fellow leaders who endorsed it wholeheartedly. And it was great to see how quickly development partners rallied to that cause. The United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, and later on New Zealand, providing significant resources to allow us to establish the Pacific NDC Hub as a partnership between SPREP, SBC, GGI, and GIZ. And while it took us a little while to get fully organized, as soon as we were up and running. And as has been pointed out earlier, requests were coming in from all of the member countries, and all of them have been addressed, although some of them are still in progress. We've been working very hard with experts from countries and also regional experts to assist countries to enhance their NDCs, to develop implementation plans, to look at barriers, to look at how to communicate these issues to their constituencies and to their private sector. A number of different activities have been carried out. And I think the phase that we're now coming to as a result of this new 2030 strategy is to provide support to Pacific Island countries for implementing the NDCs, which is really where the crunch of the issue is. We have all the countries have looked at validating their NDCs, enhancing them, bringing in new sectors, and I think we're now at that point where we need to begin the support for implementation. Now, this is going to take a lot of effort. The NDC Hub does have a lot of technical expertise at its disposal, both from the agencies that are partners, but also, as I mentioned, from experts around the region, both national experts and other experts in academia, etc. The challenge will be to rally all of this together and to seek out the resources from most likely international financing to start implementing the various aspects of the NDCs. Some of this we can do collectively, we can do it together as a group of countries perhaps. In other cases, it will need to be it will need to be implemented purely by one country. It all depends on the actual activity that each country has in their implementation plan. But we can certainly utilize the NDC hub to try and bring down costs of implementation through perhaps some joint purchasing or joint activities in terms of training, in terms of developing resources for how to track NDCs and so on. So I want to thank our partners for their continued support. We would, of course, invite them to continue that support into the next phase of the strategy. And we would also welcome any other development partners who are willing to come and assist the Pacific with this very important work. And finally, I would like to thank the other partner agencies, SPREP, GI, and GIZ, and our host government for the NDC Hub, the Fiji government, for so kindly hosting the hub in Suva. And I wish you all the best with the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for coming, and have a great day. And we'll see you at the next session. If we can please have a group photo.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Minister.
Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Very nice.
I have it. Oh, you want to hold?
Thank you.